So hello, everyone. Welcome to Neighbors, our spring Zoom Interfaith Talk series. I'm Abla Hassan. I'm an associate professor of practice of Arabic language and culture and the program coordinator here at UNL. The talk itself will be recorded, but then I'm gonna pause the recording for your questions. I'm so grateful to those who supported the Arabic Studies program and allowed our talk series to take place. I'm so thankful to Digital Islamic Studies Curriculum Program, a program housed at Michigan University for their support, for their continuous support. I'm so grateful to Evan Murphy for his personal support. I'm grateful to supporters and co-sponsors from UNL, Department of Modern Languages and Literatures here at UNL, Department of Classics and Religious Studies, the Honors Program. I'm so grateful to the community support and to students who join us for our meetings. Today, I'm so honored. We're going to have a conversation with Reverend Dr. Jim Kick for what everyone should know about Christianity. Dr. Kick is a senior minister at First Plymouth Congregational Church here at Lincoln, Nebraska. Born in Iowa, undergraduate degrees from the University of Colorado and graduate degrees from Berkeley. Dr. Kick has pastored Christian churches in Boston, LA, San Francisco, and Lincoln for 32 years. For him, religion is not a conceptual category, but a lived experience of individuals in community. When not at a church, he loves to play golf, basketball, handball, tennis, or just about any sport. And let me share with you something, Dr. Kick, you already know this. I've sent this to you in an email under thank you, right, title. But probably our guests, you don't know this. The whole talk series is named after a great experience I had with Dr. Jim Kick, Neighbors. I had, like 2 years ago, the honor of being invited by Dr. Kick to the main worship service, the main one, every Sunday for 8 Sundays, where Dr. Kick invited me to share every Sunday a verse from the Quran and a reflection, and ended with a beautiful message about knowing our Muslim neighbors and learning about them. When I started the talk series, immediately, Interfaith Talk series, I thought of you, Dr. Jim, because this is something I learned from you as a role model. And if there is one thing I want everyone to take from this, is to take the message and to pass it to others. I got inspired by you, and I'm hoping we get someone, inspired community member, one of our friends or students, do something to keep this beautiful dialogue going on. So thank you so much, Dr. Kick. Thank you also for accepting my invitation today. And I'll send through this talk series, this talk conversation and the whole series, a big virtual hug to everyone in First Plymouth as well. A very beautiful place, guys, a very beautiful place. The best music ever, and I mean it. And you know that, Dr. Kick, right? You have the best music ever. The smiley, happy faces and the warm hugs. I believe this is the place I got hugs the most in my life. And that was before COVID. I don't know what you do with hugs now, Dr. Kick, maybe virtual hugs, right? So thank you so much for joining us. And like the basic question, and forgive our ignorance here, I'm gonna start with what is Christianity? How do you define Christianity? What makes someone Christian, and what are the core beliefs in Christianity?
Well, I think being a Christian is, in some overriding sense, being a follower of Jesus Christ, but we'll get more into that in specifics. Before let me just say what a joy, Dr. Hassan, it is to be here. And when you were referencing that your time with us, just to give that more color, folks, she would read the Quran in our worship and then give a little message herself. But that was the service that we televise on NBC and Fox throughout the entire state of Nebraska. And because there continues to be, cultural illiteracy and even forms of Islamophobia, I was pretty sure I that I would receive some hate mail, given that through Fox station and NBC, it covered the entire state, and I get hate mail if people don't like the color of my tie. So I was expecting a lot of kind of blowback, and I want to say one of the most beautiful realities of that, I literally did not receive a single um, letter of disturbance, because again, this was reading the Quran in a Christian worship. It was having a message based on the Quran in Christian worship. And I think it had to be that you're just, Dr. Hassan is just so wildly likable and people just get warm fuzzies immediately. But that was extraordinary to me. But even as I begin to answer those most basic questions about Christianity, let me also begin by saying I appreciate the different resonances I'm hearing in the title you gave these, what everyone should know about Christianity, Islam, Judaism, what everyone should know. I mean, I hear one resonance dealing with cultural and religious illiteracy, that we wish people should know something about these religions, because if we're going to be citizens of a pluralistic nation or wherever we live, cultural literacy makes for greater compassion and understanding. So part of that title, I hear the should there, and let me highlight how important it is in the United States, where I would say religious literacy is catastrophically low. And let me give you a sense why. If you're going to talk about religion in America, you really only need to have three numbers in mind: 65, 30, and 5. And that is that 65% of Americans will self-identify as Christians. That's almost a supermajority, but that's down a full 10 percentage points in only a decade. But 65% of Americans will say they're Christian. Fully 30% of Americans now will say they don't belong to, they won't identify as a specific religion when asked. So 65, 35, that means, listen, that means 95% of Americans are either Christian or not of any religion at all. Hear that again. That's 95%. So one of the difficulties in America is we are not religiously diverse enough. Every other religion represents only 5% of the American population. That's a combined category of Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, pagan, Native American. You add all that together and it represents only 5% of the American population. So the biggest problem is the typical American has almost no experience of other religions. If I ask in a given audience if someone has been to Shabbat, if I ask if someone's been to Friday night prayers at a mosque, if I've asked if they've been at a Hindu temple and seen the priest pour coconut milk over a statue, I would get almost nobody in a given crowd that has actually attended or taken part in some of these other religions. So Americans typically have a dismally low amount of interaction with other religions. They might know someone in the workplace that is of another religion, but they may have never had a conversation. So first, I just appreciate that this series is increasing literacy. That's part of how I hear that phrase, what everyone should know. But I also hear a kind of fun positivity in this phrase of what everyone should know about the beautiful things about these religions. It's just almost a fun boosterism here. We should shout it from the rooftops, these beautiful things about Islam or Judaism or Buddhism. And so part of me just wants to shout some positive aspects of Christianity for this, just the fun of it. But also I hear in that phrase another resonance, what everyone should know about a given religion. I hear it wanting to almost ask, what are the essential aspects of a religion? And that's a dangerous task, to become an essentialist about any one religion. But I'm going to kind of lean into a little bit of that and try to talk a little bit both about some essential aspects of Christianity, but also just some of the positivity I want to lift up. And again, as I start to speak, you always have to qualify. Um, when I talk about Christianity, well, it is a mammothly variegated phenomenon. It is the world's largest religion by a long shot, about 2.4 billion, although the way demographics work here, those numbers don't mean a lot, but about 2.4 billion. The second largest religion is a half a billion less. That's Islam, at about 1.9 billion worldwide. But the scale of worldwide religions are kind of crazy, by the way, because after Christianity and Islam, it drops wildly off. So you heard those numbers. Then it drops down to about a billion Hindus, mainly because of India. Then it drops even faster, maybe 450 million Buddhists. It keeps dropping a lot faster. There maybe are only about 15 million Jews in the world. Did you hear the way those numbers, the scale changes? So when you're talking about religion on the planet Earth, once you've said Christianity and Islam, you've swept in the lion's share. If you're just talking numbers. So there's a weird sense of scale. But given the fact that Christianity is the world's largest religion, that means that as it embeds itself in cultures around the world, it becomes incredibly pluriform. So when I'm speaking, I'm speaking as a 58-year-old Anglo American male, about Christianity. Know that I by no means represent the most common category. Global Christianity has moved primarily into the Southern Hemisphere. And so if you wanted to just combine the most common demographic categories, the typical Christian would be a young female of color. So say like a 19-year-old Brazilian woman. That's the single most common category if you combine the largest demographic numbers. So an older white male talking from the United States is not the most common Christian perspective. So to remember that it is, incredibly variegated. And then I have to even keep qualifying myself, and I haven't even gotten to your basic question yet about when I'm going to talk about religion. Um, no one even knows what a religion is, my friends. It's kind of a trope in anthropology classes to ask students to define religion because people have been trying to define it, social scientists, anthropologists, theologians. There is no easy, all-encompassing definition of even what it is when we're talking about a religion, Christianity as a religion. If you look at it as a set of beliefs or more in terms of practices, um, and you don't even like, even when you're talking about religion, where does a religion primarily reside? In human hearts, in the individual, in books and institutions? It becomes a very slippery uh, task to try to define what religion is. But let me say what I notice in my setting. The word religion itself has taken on negative connotations in the English language, and this is fascinating. Over the last 40 years, I think you can track how this word now, again, is going to be taken with a primarily negative tone. Um, so, for example, when people think religion, thinking through the last 40 years in America, look at what's been happening. In the 1980s, the rise of sort of Christian televangelism and the sort of money grubbing cheesiness of it began to turn young people off to Christianity or religion. So too then in the 1990s, religion in America, which is primarily Christian, began to look like it was anti-gay. And so it began to look cheesy and mean, and cheesy and mean is not a good look, by the way. And then as you come into 2001 and the 9/11 attacks, it looked like religion to Americans, it looked like religion could become violent. Or even take in the 90s too, religion became very politically involved, and Americans don't like religion to be so mixed with politics. And then even now, of course, you have a type of white supremacist, white nationalist Christianity that displays itself at insurrections in the Capitol. So, decade after decade, there's been reasons that Americans find that even the word religion to be distasteful. It either means something cheesy and sideways, or it means something dogmatic or irrelevant. And that's why you continue to see larger amounts of people avoid the word altogether. They'll say, I'm spiritual, but not religious, or and so I'm sensitive to the fact when I say the word religion to people speaking the English language, it's primarily has negative effect. I need to qualify it by saying when I say the word religion, I actually do it with a deep delight. because religion, when I say the word, and now it's my own private lexicon, but when I say the word religion, I mean something that is aspiring for fairness, beauty, and wonder. So when I say religion or when I say Christianity, first, I mean something that is seeking a world that is more fair. I mean the primary ethical impulse. So the very moment I say religion, um, I'm meaning that basic ethical inclination to make the world a more fair place. And so something like Christianity is deeply embedded with this ethic in our scriptures, starting with the Hebrew prophets, the amount of attention that's paid to the marginalized, the oppressed, the poor, and seeking some form of equity. I'm using the word fairness rather than justice or equity because those are so um, euphemistic almost now. But I mean a basic fairness, and human beings, I think, have an embedded sense of fairness. Well, the Hebrew prophets lift that up, and then the ministry of Jesus Christ is constantly paying special attention to the downtrodden. There's a code in scripture, the widows, orphans, and poor, that is repeated for those that are downtrodden. So when I say religion, I mean this impulse to make the world more fair, this ethical impulse, but I also mean wonder. And by that, I mean the type of wonder and awe at life itself, that basic religious reaction to why is there anything at all, for example. That's the grand philosophical question. But to the religious person, it creates this sense of awe. Abraham Heschel, the great rabbi, said that religion at its base is about radical amazement. So when I say religion, I mean seeking what's fair. I mean taking a wonder and joy in the mystery of things. And I mean beauty. Again, when you're trying to define religion, are you talking beliefs or practices? But in large part, religion is a cultural production of beautiful things, beautiful buildings, music, beautiful artworks, intellectual endeavors. And so when I say the word religion, I mean seeking fairness and having wonder and awe, but also the creation of beauty, and in all its many forms and media. So again, with all those kind of qualifications to talking about it, let's get into what I think everybody should know about Christianity. You asked me what Christianity is and what its basic beliefs are. And so this is what I think everyone should know. And first and foremost is the fact that Christianity makes the startling claim that love is the essence of reality. Love is the essence of reality. It's not merely a feeling or an emotion or a thought, that love is the essence of reality. In 1 John chapter 4, it says that no one has ever seen God, but when we love each other, God abides in us, and God's love is perfected in us, for God is love. Oh, right there. The Christian scriptures say God is love. It doesn't say, which would be easier to say, God is loving. It doesn't say, which would be easier to say, God is like love. It says God is love. So that equates the most infinite power of the universe, the very essence of the universe, God, with love. Now, this is a wildly mystical and ontological claim to say that love is the essence of reality. So, when I say the word love, in some basic sense, we must mean the valuing of persons. I know you can give it a lot more poetic form, but to love someone is to value a person. And so the person in Christianity, the person becomes at the center. The person becomes the very key to reality itself. So, my friends, a person, a personality, or I'm going to use the word person or soul or consciousness as synonyms here. A personality is a collection of memories and hopes and dreams and expectations. A person, from the Christian perspective, is a completely unique creation of God, that God creates souls. And by creation, I'm not saying that Christians don't believe in evolution or speciation by natural selection. No, I mean that God might use that mechanism in the creation of persons. A person is the central miracle of God's creation from the Christian perspective, a person. So they are a one-time unique, completely unique soul or consciousness that is of intrinsic and inherent worth. The dignity of the person is absolutely central to the Christian faith. When God is love, and love means the valuing of persons, persons are of such intrinsic, infinite dignity and value that the Christian faith as a whole is poised against any forms of depersonalization, in any ways that human beings are being oppressed, or somebody has a foot on their throat, or they're unable to achieve their fullness and their flourishing. So this valuing of persons is essential. So God is love. That means the essence of reality is love. Loving persons or valuing persons is what love is really about. Persons are central. What Christianity moves towards is a very deeply metaphysical claim, and that is that consciousness is primary to reality itself. It's an ontological primary, that in fact consciousness, and when I say consciousness, Dr. Hassan, you have some experience of what it is to be you. This is what I'm referring to consciousness. This is something I have no access to, but you have some experience of what it's like to be you. This is this consciousness. Well, that consciousness is considered to be primary to all of reality, so that in fact, God is conceived primarily as a consciousness, but we'll get into a little bit more about the doctrine of God. But secondly, what I want to say Christianity that everyone should know is it is a radical claim about human potential. What the Christian religion will say that the human being, what they are meant to be and what they are meant to achieve, is stunning. The Christian tradition will say that the human being can be perfected. Now, in different traditions, this is called sanctification or deification or theosis. By different traditions, I mean Eastern Orthodoxy in Christianity, or Protestantism in Christianity, or Roman Catholicism. I'm speaking of the Christian tradition. In the Christian tradition, there becomes a radical identity with the divine. Not only is the divine considered within, but the human being itself can be perfected into that divinity. All through scriptures, there's a radical identity with Christ, for example. In Paul's letters, it says we are in Christ. As human beings or persons, we are in Christ. Not that simply we believe in some exterior reality, but that we are in it. Jesus Christ himself in 17th chapter of John talks about being one with God, one with us, one, all a oneness, perfectly one, as he calls it. So this is again another startling claim that the human potential, that human beings can be utterly perfected. They can live into a divine potential. That's a very unusual claim in what now I think has become a rather cynical culture. I think it might be one of those claims that sounds too good to be true. I think our vision now of human nature is rather pessimistic, is it not? But the Christian religion will keep coming back in and saying a human being can become perfect, at one with the divine, ethically perfect, mystically in full communion with the divine. This is extraordinary. Now, I've already, when I said that being Christian was primarily following Jesus, Dr. Hassan, now I'm ready to talk about Jesus. Is that where you'd want me to go, or do you have another question that you're wanting me to go a different direction, or should I keep plowing through that main big question?
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead,
Okay.
please.
Okay, well, I'll keep, so if I want, what everyone should know about Christianity, well, Jesus. I was deeply involved in multi-faith efforts in San Francisco when I was a pastor there. In fact, we started the largest multi-faith network in the city, some 500 clergy from all traditions, Buddhist, Hindu, Roman Catholic, Muslim, it was just post 9/11, and holding all these symposia and gatherings what people of other religions want to know about Christianity is they want to know about Jesus, because they seem to intuit, almost everyone from another religion seems to intuit that Jesus Christ is right at the heart of whatever the heck the Christian religion is about. So let me talk a bit about Jesus. Um, I'm right off, you're hearing me say his name in sort of a anglicized Greek form. That's not his name, of course. His name would be something like Rabbi Yeshua ben Yosef. And so Rabbi Yeshua ben Yosef, uh, that's meaning Rabbi Yeshua, Joshua. His name, if you wanted to put his name into English, his name is Joshua. So his name in English would really be Josh. So it's a very lowly kind of normal. I don't mean lowly if there's a Josh on this Zoom call. I don't mean lowly, but it's a common name. Rabbi Yeshua ben Yosef, son of Joseph. So that's his name. But then Christians take that name Joshua in the Greek form. Joshua becomes Jesus. And then they add a title. His name is not Jesus Christ. That's his first name with a title that's added. Christ, meaning the anointed one or Messiah in Hebrew. So Jesus Christ, that name itself is holding together this extraordinary connection and tension between a human life and the most cosmic. So a cosmic reality, a cosmic Christ, but also based in a human life. This will become what is probably the core paradox of the Christian faith, the idea that God became human. That's a paradoxical sentence, of course, completely. But it's that forever fruitful paradox that much of the faith revolves around. So Jesus Christ, let me just speak of Rabbi Yeshua first, though. So you probably know the basics about him. Christians believe him to be a historical person. By the way, so do historical scholars. We have plenty of evidence that it was likely he actually existed. That used to be a big controversy. In the late 1800s in German scholarship, for example, they wondered if Jesus of Nazareth was completely a creation of the later church, just an amalgam of some figures that they sort of combined, but that he never really existed. Well, we have plenty of evidence, even compared to other figures of antiquity. We have a lot more that he was. There was a person, Jesus of Nazareth, that did exist. You know the basics of the gospel story. The gospels don't tell us anything about him until he was 30. There's one scene when he's 12 years old, but then somewhere around 30 years old, it takes men a long time to grow up, by the way, but somewhere around 30 years old, he comes to the River Jordan to be baptized, and he begins a ministry. And you all have a little, most of us probably have some of this um, uh, basic storyline of how he gathered disciples, which just means student in Greek. He got and began to go village from village, curing many diseases and ailments, giving teachings and preachings, primarily in the form of stories or parables, performing miracles, and then throughout this 1 to 3 year ministry, then going to Jerusalem, and then the Romans executing him in a common form of execution. You probably have this basic storyline. Then, as Christians understand, then a resurrection took place. This is the gospel story. But I want to highlight one fact for you as students today. The Christian religion presents as its central figure Jesus, a figure that is wildly nonviolent. In fact, so nonviolent, it will boggle your imagination. And I've got to do a little work here to explain to you how completely nonviolent Jesus was, to a degree that should challenge all of us when we even think of what's possible. So let me help you understand that the Gospels were written in Greek. These stories about Jesus's life and what he did and who he was, they were written in Greek. Now, the way you learned how to write Greek in first century Palestine was you copied Homer. So in the Near East there, if you're going to learn how to write Greek, Homer was the primer. You would sit there and literally copy in Greek the Homeric epics. So these people that could write Greek in the first century, had the basic storylines of Homer embedded within them. And I'm talking about the Homeric epics, the heroes of Homer, like Odysseus and Ulysses and Heracles and such. So they had these heroic stories. And so what you can see in the gospel is they are telling you a story about how Jesus is their hero because they're following the Homeric the heroic code that's in Homer almost perfectly. So you see them, what they're telling you is a story about their hero from a Greek perspective. A hero in Homer does very basic things. Number one, a hero is able to display wisdom in public forums. This is what heroes can do in Homer. They can stride into a public setting and display wisdom and insight. Heroes in Homer also treat people of all classes equally. A hero in Homer will treat a king, will treat a pauper just as well as they would treat a king. They have this sense of the inherent worth of every person. They will treat them with respect. That's a hero in Homer. A hero in Homer will perform miracles and healings. They did that. That's a typical heroic attribute. So the gospel writers are replaying this Homeric code, this heroic code, because they think Jesus is their hero. But here's where it gets amazing. They eliminate one element of the heroic code, and its omission is glaring. They follow every other. In fact, the Gospels are even replaying scenes from Odysseus and Ulysses, scenes on the sea, various healing scenes, teaching scenes. They're virtually replaying set pieces of Homer, but they leave one thing out. The hero in Homer, at some point, will vanquish their foes through violence. The hero, at some point, will obliterate their foes, killing them or you know. So and this aspect of the hero is then deeply embedded in the Western imagination. One author calls it the myth of redemptive violence, the idea that at some point you can solve the problem through violence. You can punch the bad guy in their face or you can kill him, and that will solve the problem. Well, that's an aspect of heroes even to this day. You go to any movie, and the protagonist in a movie at some point is going to punch the bad guy in the face because we get this thrill. We think violence actually solves problems. We actually think that if we act violently, it will fix things somehow, and that they deserve it. Well, Jesus Christ in the Christian Gospels never strikes anyone, never engages in any violence whatsoever. Now, he throws the tables over in the temple, so he engages in symbolic anger at times. But no one is ever struck or hit. At one point, his disciples try to defend him, pull their swords as he's about to be arrested, cut off the ear of one of the people coming at him, but he tells them to put the sword back. He won't even self-defend. This is where it gets unbelievable. He would die rather than protect himself. So the vision we get out of the Gospels is of such a complete nonviolence, it forever stands as a testimony to how we understand how the world works. Now, I, for one, am not a pacifist. So this keeps the Christian faith being forever aspirational. So, for example, I'm not a pacifist in that I believe nation states should self-defend at times. I do believe that we should protect ourselves. If my own home was under attack, I would self-protect. I would protect my family. The Jesus the Gospels offer would not. The Jesus the Gospels offer is completely nonviolent. He is the hero without a fist, and he's the only hero without a fist that has ever been presented in major Western literature that I know of, in that term of that male heroic figure. Of course, many other religious figures engage at some point in violence, if you think through the various traditions. So this is highly unusual. And so what I think everyone should know about Christianity is its central figure is nonviolence isn't even, of course, for Christians, nonviolence isn't even a word that's adequate. He seems to be love and compassion incarnate. For believing Christians, there seems to be an utter purity of the way he acts out of compassion, and that it seems to be beyond his ken completely to engage in any kind of physical violence. So, Okay, I'm still just trying to shout from the rooftops of what everyone believes about Christianity. So let me go to my next one I have. Um, I need you to know that Christianity does not claim that God exists. I'm letting that pause for some effect. Christianity does not claim that God exists. Okay, I'm playing a little trick with the English language there because the word exists is used in a very specific way in the English language. When we say something exists, what we mean is it's an object alongside other objects, or it's a finite being alongside other finite beings. So the way we use the word exists does not work in the classic Christian doctrine about God. God is infinite. God cannot be an object alongside other objects. God is the infinite creator. So God can't be an object in the universe altogether. Now, classic Christian reflection has always understood this, but the reason I want to tell you this very clearly is people in the English language constantly make the mistake that they think Christianity is saying that God is a being alongside other beings. God is not a being alongside other beings due to all the classic church fathers. I'm not making this up. This is classic Christian theology. God is not a being alongside other beings. God is being itself. God is not a being alongside other beings. God is being itself. So the Christian doctrine of God, which is I tell you, some of the second, third, fourth, fifth century theologians had this high metaphysical grasp of this and would explain that again and again, that you can't turn God into a being alongside other beings. And yet we do it all the time. So even when I use the word God in English, you imagine I'm meaning some some super being or something, but that's precisely what God is not. Um, so this is the reason I wanted to kind of add that to my top points about Christianity is this is where so many mistakes are made. So, for example, about 10 years ago, no, maybe 15, there was a publishing phenomenon, the so-called new atheists that were writing books about atheism and about how ridiculous the Christian faith is. Well, they didn't read any of the high Christian theology. And they were imagining that when Christians say the word God, that we meant some sort of object alongside other objects. No, God is infinite, inscrutable, and mysterious, but due to the basic doctrine. And so you're not allowed, you're not even allowed within the Christian imagination to suppose such a thing. However, the English language has to use poetry and metaphor. So we talk about God as if God is a person because there's no way God could be less than a person. I mean, to the Christian imagination, we're not saying God has arms and legs and is a finite being, but God is a consciousness, and that is what it is to be a person. So God is a will, God is a consciousness, but that is an infinite consciousness which is beyond our imagination. Um, so I don't need to belabor that point, but that connects to my other main talking point about what is Christianity, something everyone should know, and that is what I'm just talking about now. Christianity is far more symbolic than it is literal. And again, the tradition fully understands this, but the only way you can talk religiously is in symbol and metaphor. That's the way language works. So if you imagine that spiritual truths exist almost in a Platonic realm, spiritual or intellectual truths, but we use words that relate to the sensate world. So we use words from the physical world to talk about spiritual ideas, but an odd transposition has taken place. So all human language about God is metaphorical or symbolic. The ancient church fathers said this all the time. It is by its nature. It can only be symbolic because we're taking words from the physical world and relating it to infinite spiritual truths. People radically underestimate how the Christian religion itself knows that religious language is poetry and metaphor. Now we get into some odd branches of Christianity that aren't as tied to historical theology that begin to take things with a hyper literalness. We all think of biblical fundamentalism, for example, that are imagining everything that it's still using language, which again, any theory of language would know that language is signs, symbols, and metaphors, but they'll take those, they'll reify those into literal beliefs. And so many things that people think are ridiculous about the Christian faith, Christians themselves don't take it literally, but there are certainly odd offshoot groups that do. And so let me continue with a couple of things I want people to know about Christianity. Well, this one's a little complicated, but I want you to know about it because it's a particular American phenomenon. Christianity as a religion is less church-based than you might imagine. So when I say Christianity or religion, a typical American thinks immediately of a church. But prior to the 1800s in North America, Christianity as a religion wasn't expressed primarily through churches or cathedrals. Christianity was based primarily in families and villages. And so it was a cultural manifestation and something within families and individuals. But those ancient cathedrals you see in Europe, if you've traveled in Europe, and a lot of people will lament that those cathedrals are empty now, they were always empty. People didn't attend church there regularly. Those cathedrals in Europe, they used to store cattle and supplies during the week because no one was in there. Those cathedrals were destination points for the high holy days and for certain key moments like baptisms and such. But Christians did not typically engage in weekly worship in what we call churches regularly. So, for example, in the 1700s in America, less than 10% of people attended churches regularly. Because being Christian was something that was done in prayers and activities at the home and in the villages, but going to church regularly was not a part of what it was to be an American Christian. But then in the 1800s, as churches began to spread through the land, we got up to about maybe 20% of Christians attending churches. But still, that's a minority. What happened was certain technologies developed, like you wouldn't, excuse me, I'm not saying this well, but if you, in the mid 1800s, if you lived 5 miles from a church, how likely is you're going to ride a horse on Sunday morning to listen to a preacher like me? You're going to really ride miles and miles to go listen to a preacher? No, you wouldn't do that. So too, you wouldn't ride a horse miles and miles to go to a place that had no central heating or air conditioning, correct? And so what happened is, as certain technologies developed, the car, central heating, air conditioning, suddenly people began to attend churches very regularly, so that by the 1930s or 40s in America, you're up to almost half of Christians regularly attending worship every week. And so it becomes, in the American imagination, a real church-based reality, that where do you go to be Christian? You go to a church. That was never the historical assumption. The historical assumption is, where do you go to be a Christian? Wherever you are right now. That being a Christian is about is not so much even a set of beliefs or a set of rituals. Christianity is a way of life. Another complex historical development took place. We became a pluralistic nation. So watch how this happens. Churches become central in our mind because as we become a pluralistic nation, that means Christianity has to withdraw from the public square. Rightly so. Christianity can't be what government's about anymore. It can't be, so there has to be a special place you go to be Christian. Once you have to acknowledge that a religion should not be the official religion of a nation, which is a good assumption, and that we're going to be in a pluralistic, then you have to have special places you go to express that. You can't express it just in the town hall meeting in your local village. You can't get up and start singing the doxology and opening the Bible. But before that, remember, that was a slow development. Remember, in the 1920s, we still taught the Bible in school. More people learned about the Bible in school than they did by going to church, because not many people went to church. So you have to understand, the Bible and Christianity withdraws from the public square. And now we imagine, if you're a Christian, it's going to church is a big part of that, but that's not been the historical reality. That's an odd development. How are we doing on time? I got about 3 more possibilities to lift up, Dr. Hassan, but I don't need to.
No, please go ahead. We need to hear the last 3 points.
I'll do these quickly. I'm saying that it's less church-based than you imagine, but I would also want people to remember that Christianity is an offshoot Jewish sect. And if you don't understand that we're an offshoot Jewish sect, then you'll miss a lot about what religion is about and how these symbolic truths entwine. So just let me quickly remind you that Jesus was Jewish. All his disciples were Jewish. The Apostle Paul was Jewish. It doesn't appear that Jesus or the Apostle Paul thought they were starting a new religion. It looks more like that Paul was a universalizing Jew. He wanted to take the Jewish faith across the Mediterranean rim there and universalize what being Jewish could be. So the Christian faith was essentially a Jewish reform movement, but there were lots of Jewish groups. Judaism was just as variegated in the first century as it is now. So we were a particular Jewish group that was trying to take Judaism to the wider world, as it were. What you might not realize, and this is what people need to know if you're going to think historically about religions, it was not clear that Christianity was a separate religion from Judaism for over 200 years. Now, like, if you ask a historian, when exactly do we know that Christianity is a separate religion from Judaism? Well, what is it to be a separate religion? Some historians will say around 90 AD, certain types of Jews were being kicked out of the synagogues. Those were the Jesus followers. So there was a fight going on, but there were lots of fights, so religious groups fight with one another. I mean, so Judaism has lots of groups that fight with each other. Christianity has 40,000 different denominations, and they're all fighting with each other, right? About who's really Christian. So there's nothing unusual about some Jews being kicked out of their own synagogue, but some historians seize upon that. I would look more to the historians that look, you can't have Christianity as a separate freestanding religion from Judaism until you had the empire convert to Christianity. So now you're getting into even early 4th century. So you have to understand that for Christianity was an offshoot Jewish sect, and it took hundreds of years for it to be obvious that it wasn't still Jewish, because that's how deeply immersed or entwined, the Jewish sensibility and worldview and theology is with what it is to be Christian. Then I also just what I would want to say briefly that everyone should know about Christianity is that a certain technology radically changed it. So there was a technological development that changed in deep ways what people think Christianity is about, and that is the printing press. Before the 1400s, it would not be typical that a Christian would have their own Bible. But now when I say Christianity, you assume that there's a book that is so central, the Bible, that Christians had it and they read it. But you have to understand, for over the first millennium and a half, typical Christians couldn't own a Bible. Those things were hand copied. You know how expensive a Bible was? So you didn't read the Bible as a Christian. You heard the stories told in your family, in the village, and at the church. So there was a much more improvisational, jazzy kind of sense about what the stories were about, because it's based on how a teller is telling it, right? And so there was no book that one would somehow look to be the sole or primary guide of faith. You were hearing these stories and these traditions as the primary guide or authority of the faith. But then once there's a printing press, suddenly you could, after it still took another 100 years, you could purchase a Bible, but you don't have Christians actually reading their own Bibles until universal education comes in. So you need to understand, with Christianity, it's a modern phenomenon now. When you think of a Christian that has a Bible, that imagines that's the sole, not just primary, but virtually the sole authority of faith, and they are supposed to pour over this ink on a page, which is just a technology. A printed book is a technology, but they'll pour over that as somehow being the primary guide of their faith. That is a novel historical development. And I wish people understood that Christianity, for most of its time, was not based on people reading something we call the Bible. The Bible was a primary role within its expression, for sure. Does that make sense? And then lastly, I just want to say to students that Christianity is not, no, let me frame it positively. Christianity is pro-gay and anti-patriarchal. Um, and at the heart, I'm just saying this as a preacher, at the heart of its entire sensibility and ethics, it's pro-gay and anti-patriarchal. There's some odd developments again recently where Christians over this past couple hundred years will go to 7 texts that seem to be against gay people, but every biblical scholar knows those texts are not clear. That it's not clear they're talking about what we call homosexuality at all, that those texts are talking about ancient issues like male temple prostitution, pederasty, pagan sexual behaviors, that when we say gay or homosexual, we mean a type of same gender love between people. And that was not even a concept in the ancient world. So those texts aren't talking about that at all. The Bible and the entire tradition celebrates the love between two people. It so completely celebrates it that when you pick up a Bible that has the word homosexuality in it, and some Bibles, American Bibles, do have the word in a couple of those passages I'm talking about, they have the word homosexual. That word itself wasn't even coined until the 1890s. That word is not even in the Bible. They're translating a Greek word inappropriately to a word that we mean when we say homosexuality, we mean an orientation. That's not what it means in the Greek at all. So that's a newly coined American English word that was put into Bible translations. So it's the Christian religion is for the love between people in whatever form that takes, and also um, uh, the entire tradition is weighs against what we would call sexism or a patriarchy that continues to oppress women. And Jesus, his own ministry, I'm running out of time, I understand. His own ministry was so radically egalitarian in the way that he treated men and women. And the entire faith is toward a type of deep equality of souls. And so lastly, let me just end with that when you hear the word Christianity, one of the first phrases that should come to your mind is the equality of souls. Each and every person, every soul, completely equal, completely loved. I've kind of been babbling on, Dr. Hassan. Other questions, or how should we
Thank you
handle
so
this?
much. I'm so grateful to the beautiful introduction to Christianity.
Mm.
Truly a beautiful introduction that everyone should know about Christianity. I'm also grateful to clarifying many misunderstandings and stereotypes about Christianity, including this modern shift we see in all religions from being religious to being spiritual and almost getting offended, when something is or someone described as religious. Like with this, how do we know the right kind of writing of readings, books, resources, links? What is your list of recommendations for those who want to learn more about Christianity? What
Oh,
would you recommend? Like
oh,
student mind, they always like look for a list of where should we go to know more about this.
oh my gosh! I should have prepared a syllabus of some sort. Um, because as an intro, I will say, I'll just offer one name that I think people should read just because he was an important person in my life. My New Testament professor is named Marcus Borg. That's B-O-R-G. Marcus, M-A-R-C-U-S, Borg, B-O-R-G. And he has written a couple of books that I think are a wonderful type of introduction to what is a more kind of open-minded, open-hearted rendering of the tradition. One is uh, um, meeting Jesus again for the first time, which is kind of an interesting phrase. But if you just Google Marcus Borg, B-O-R-G, and read any of his books, you'll hear a Christianity expressed that I think he both is faithful to the tradition, but eliminates the sort of biases and just prejudices that have embedded themselves in the tradition.
Thank you so much. Also, I'm grateful and for what I've learned from you today. Out of everything else, love is the essence of reality. I teach every fall a class on love in the Arabic culture, and Dr. Jim, this will go on the first page of my syllabus next time I'm teaching this course.
Do you know that there's a Roman Catholic theologian, one of the greatest of the 20th century, that said, this is a Roman Catholic theologian, love alone is credible. Nothing else should be believed. Nothing else ought to be believed. Nothing else can be believed. Nothing else ought to be believed. He was elevated to cardinal, so he's the highest churchly authority, and he's saying love alone is credible. That means if you hear anything in the Christian faith that doesn't sound loving, it's not really part of the Christian faith.
Wow, so beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm going to pause the recording now to allow questions from my students. I see a lot of my students, and I know you'll be getting a lot of questions. Thank you so much for honoring the Arabic Studies program by being our guest today. Thank you so much.
God bless. Thank you.